Nitesh? Right. Okay. So the subject matter of today's discussion is fundamentally the shift in the educational policy of the government of the East India Company and the rise of English education in India. So because this paper deals with Indian writing in English, it is imperative for us to know the routes through which Indian writing entered into English entered into India. English as a policy tool, as a language of literature. And this is where I would like to look at a few very central figures who went into the making of this policy. Now, the one thing that we will have to remember is that, as I pointed out in our last class, that the language policy of the East India Company prior to the 1750s was largely to conduct the proceedings in the Indian languages, and that while they were sort of busy mopping up the resources from India, the cultural life of the people was largely left untouched. Cultural, religious life. Although the missionaries had started exerting their influences, there's not a substantial amount of change in terms of the intervention of the government in terms of policy. But you will also have to remember that as the Mughal Empire declined, and the spell of the East India Company, especially after 1757, started extending in terms of geographical area, that is, it became imperative for them also to create a kind of a colonial bureaucracy, right? So they needed government servants, and not all of them could be Englishmen, obviously, because so many Englishmen could not be sent to India. So there was a need for a colonial bureaucracy as well. So there was a rising, demand for Indian English education, for a transformation from Persian to English as a modus operandi for the bureaucracy, and to create a pool of people who would be comfortable with the English language so that this bureaucracy could operate. And therefore, educational policy had to undergo a substantial amount of change. Now, at the same time, within India also, there was a gradual recognition of the British European Enlightenment ideas. And the fact that, science was sweeping Europe, that it was with science that the Indians realized that the British had come and conquered India, they had made better arms, they had better ships. So there was a desire to participate in this discourse of science. Also, you will remember that, that the end of the Mughal Empire had seen chaos in India. And this chaos had, manifested itself in a kind of a political instability, in a religious animosity, and therefore there was a large-scale demand for a substantial amount of, rectification in the ruling. You will also have to remember that India, as we now know it, was largely fragmented into different territories, which were ruled by the feudal satraps. So, the end of the Mughal Empire saw India being fragmented into different kinds of separate areas. So, from within India also, there was demand that, there should be English education. There should be, and of course, you will also have to remember that Sanskrit education, the education system in India, was extremely exclusive at this point of time. So it was still locked up with the Brahmins. The common people had very little access to it. And therefore, a larger access to education for, removing the caste bias of education was also sought. At the same time, we'll have to remember that India at this point of time was witnessing certain very regressive sort of practices like sati, widow remarriage, a widow sort of burning, child marriage, right? And therefore, there was a demand from within India that these practices should be stopped. And they turned to the colonial government so that these laws could be, passed so that these could be banned. Now, therefore, there were largely both within Indians and the British a division between two kinds of approach to the education policy. The first group was called the Orientalists, right? And you could see, the establishment of the British Asiatic Society and so on and so forth, William Jones, even Lord Bentinck, right? All of them suggested that India had a vast amount of treasures in terms of language and culture, and that they should be sort of archived, and that the language of the education policy should largely be restricted to what it was earlier as Sanskrit and Persian, right? These were going to be the large chunks of the educational policy. And therefore, in 1823, the government wanted to build a college in Kolkata, and they proposed that already a Sanskrit college would be built. 1817, we had a Hindu college, of course, but in 1823, they proposed the building also of a Sanskrit college. So it was the traditionalists who were, as it were, on the verge of, controlling the education policy. Opposed to the traditionalists, right, to the Orientalists, were now let me just clarify here that the Anglicists had no great love for the Indian languages. They were no less colonial, but they were just arguing that these literatures needed to be archived, and that the cultural territory and map of India did not need to be changed fundamentally. The Anglicists opposing them argued that this was not the case. Now, there were a multiplicity of arguments, some of which will, of course, be taken up when we discuss Macaulay's Minutes. But there were two arguments that the Anglicists suggested. One, that was a reductive argument, which was forwarded by Macaulay, who suggested that the entire corpus of, Sanskrit literature could be compared to one shelf of English literature. So he was fundamentally arguing that, Indian literature was trash, nothing, not meritorious, and therefore there needed to be the study of English literature, which was qualitatively, aesthetically much more superior. Right. So this is the reductive argument of the Anglicists. There was another argument which suggested that, and this was articulated by a man called Trevelyan, who suggested that English education should be brought in because of practical purposes, that England needed a bureaucracy, and this bureaucracy could not be created only out of Englishmen. They needed Indians to participate, and that if Indians willingly participated in the bureaucracy and sort of circulated the English language and proclaimed it with joy, then you would have a comprador class, willing class of people who would accept Britishness, as it were. And therefore, there would be no chance of revolution or antipathy towards the British. And it would also generate employment among Indians, right? So Trevelyan was suggesting that the education policy should be shifted and that it should, move towards English education. Right. Now, of course, within this, Trevelyan was publishing this in 1836. Macaulay, of course, published in 1835, and this was 1835-36 is roughly the date when the Anglicist argument actually won, and this was when English became a medium of instruction and an official language of communication within India at large. Right? So if we have to date the time from which Indians were writing in the English language, of course, you have Derozio, people like Derozio who were already, writing in the English language, and there were a group of people whom the British missionaries were teaching in Duff School, for example, or for example, in what would later on be the Scottish Church College. There were Scottish missionaries who were already opening schools and teaching the Indians in English language. This group of people around the turn of the century were getting educated, and by the 1820s, all of them would be young, and they would be entering into Hindu college, where they would come under Derozio's tutelage. But you have to understand that there was a third group of people who were zealously trying to, pursue English. Why? And they were largely the Christian missionaries, right? Because they felt that the Hindus and the Muslims were religiously much inferior, that Hindu religion and Muslim religion was largely barbaric, and that there was a reformation needed in religion culture. And this could be done through the widespread, movement of Christianity and conversion, and the English language could be a vehicle through which significant amount of people could be educated in Christianity. So three groups of people were operating with the English language. One is people like Macaulay, who believed that, the Indian languages and cultures were worthless, and that English education had to be brought in to give the Indians exposure to good literature and culture. Secondly, people like Trevelyan, who were cleverly recognizing that the Indians should be educated in English because of certain policy matters, that they should learn English because England needed a group of bureaucrats, and that they would willingly then subscribe to the British rule. Thirdly, there were English missionaries who wanted to spread Christianity and therefore wanted the English language to be spread among the people. There were a fourth group, Indians, who wanted English as a tool of modernity. They wanted to be educated in the sciences, they wanted to be educated in mathematics, and they wanted education in modern philosophy to sort of clear away some of the prejudices of Hinduism, largely Hinduism, because most of these people who were operating and demanding English were Hindus. Right. So this is what we are actually looking at. Right. This is the group of people that we are looking at. Remember, this is around the late 19th century and the early 20th century. I'm very sorry. This is the late 18th century and the early 19th century. And this is where I'd like to come to my first text, and that is Raja Rammohun Roy's letter to Lord Amherst. And these are crucial texts, you see. Macaulay's Minutes, Raja Rammohun Roy's letters. Now, these are not in your official syllabus. But until and unless you know them, and you realize the impact that they had on Indian writing in English, you will not be able to appreciate why what happened. How did Indian writing in English, as it were, come into being? So let me present the letter of Raja Rammohun Roy. I have put the necessary and the more important sections in bold so that you are not inconvenienced. You can see this. Is this visible, by the way?
Yes, sir.
It is, right. So this letter is dated 11th December 1823. Remember the date, 1823. Right? And he's writing to Right Honorable William Pitt, Lord Amherst. And Rammohun says that the present rulers govern a people whose language, literature, manners, customs are new and strange to them. So we need to tell them what we want. Rammohun is telling them, we need to tell you, because you do not know us, we need to tell you what we want and why you should, tell us about your, how you should formulate your policy so that we are benefited from it. And therefore, he says a new Sanskrit school in Kolkata evinces the laudable desire of the government to improve the natives of India education, blessing by which they should be ever grateful. You see, Rammohun is very deferential, right? At this point of time, he realizes that Rammohun is using a trick here. He is being deferential because he knows that he needs the English, and he can only persuade them to change their policy according to his wish. They are the will-wisher of the human race. And when the seminary of learning was proposed, we understood that the government of England had ordered a considerable sum of money to be annually devoted. And see, we were filled with sanguine hopes. This is the most important part. That this sum would be laid out in employing European gentlemen of talents and education to instruct the natives of India in. So what does Rammohun want? Take a very careful look at this. Mathematics, natural philosophy, that is science, chemistry, anatomy, and the other useful sciences, which the nations of Europe have carried to a degree of perfection that has raised them from above the inhabitants of other parts of the world. So Rammohun is clearly telling the British, we want that education in science which has made you modern. We want to participate in your modernity, right? You see, a little later on, the Calcutta Medical College would also be established. So, he's asking the British, give us modernity, give us science, give us modern education, right? Our hearts were filled up with delight and gratitude, right? And generous and enlightened of the nations of the West with the glorious ambition of planting in Asia the arts and sciences of modern Europe. So he's asking, give us modernity. But what does he find? He says, I'm astounded, I'm surprised to find that you are establishing a Sanskrit school under Hindu Pandits to impart such knowledge as is already current in India. He says, why are you establishing another Sanskrit school? As per the Orientalist paradigm, you are only laying another school which we already know. And why Sanskrit school will only fill in the mind of people with grammatical niceties and metaphysical distinctions of little or no practicable use. So saying this is not going to help us. We'll once again go back to Vedanta, we'll once again go back to Bhakaran, Nyaya, and so on and so forth, which is entirely archaic in terms of practical use. It's not going to help us in our daily lives, not going to sort of move us towards modernity, not going to abolish sati, not going to produce scientists. Right? So, what does he ask? Rammohun asks, in order to enable your lordship to appreciate the utility of encouraging such imaginary learning, I beg your lordship will be pleased to compare the state of science and literature in England before the time of Lord Bacon, with the progress of knowledge made since he wrote. So he says, your England was before Bacon, before the Renaissance was like us, dark, medieval. And then you had science, and then it all changed. You became modern. So compare your state and our state, and give us English, give us science, so that we can move on. We too can be modern. Sanskrit system would be calculated to keep this country in darkness. But as the improvement of the native population is the object of the government, it ought to promote, note that, it ought to promote a more liberal and enlightened system of instruction, embracing mathematics, natural philosophy, chemistry, and anatomy with other useful sciences, which may be accomplished with the sum proposed by employing a few gentlemen of talents and learning educated in Europe, providing a college furnished with necessary books, instruments, and apparatus. So Rammohun is asking, give me a college with laboratories, with teachers, with the knowledge of the West in the sciences. I don't want a Sanskrit school, right? And therefore, he says, I humbly trust you will excuse the liberty I've taken in thus expressing my sentiments to your lordship. And this is Raja Rammohun Roy. You will, of course, remember that Rabindranath Tagore, in the books that he signed, considered Raja Rammohun Roy as the father of Indian modernity. Bharat Pathik Raja Rammohun is the term that he used. And he had a spat with Gandhiji, because Gandhiji thought that Raja Rammohun Roy was merely pandering to British and he was praising them. And he called Rammohun a pygmy. And Rabindranath vociferously protested against this idea, and he suggested that Raja Rammohun Roy was the harbinger of modernity and initiated a lot of reform both in religion and culture in India, along with, of course, people like Ishwar Chandra Vidyashankar, right? And therefore, you need to see, what is Rammohun asking? Rammohun is asking for modernity. So he's asking, give me English education, but I don't want English education to study literature. I want English education to be able to study science, right? And that is a very crucial document which you should, all of you, should be very crucially aware of when you are discussing the rise of Indian writing in English. Now, the other person that I would like to refer to is Grant. Now, this is a 1700 now, the texts, if you look at the dates, Macaulay's Minute on Indian Education is 1835, and Trevelyan's on the Education of the People in India is 1838. I'm sorry, I mentioned 1836. But importantly, what you should realize is that how are people going to be educated, and what the language policy is the thing that the British government is discussing. And therefore, one of the people who wrote about this earlier is a gentleman called Grant, Charles Grant, 1792. He was an employee of the East India Company, recommending the dissemination of European literature and sciences through the medium of English. And he suggests that, Indian society is steeped in superstition, idolatry, and immorality, and that the benefit of the natives could only be, the indigenous people could be, don't use the word natives, by the way, that's no longer in parlance, that the indigenous people could be improved only and only if, English education could be brought to them, right? So 1792, we already have Englishmen demanding that India be provided English education. As I pointed out, different agendas of different people. Macaulay suggests that Indians have no culture at all. All their literature is trash. And therefore, We must create a race of, expose them to English literature and create a race of people who would be by complexion Indians, but within they would have their loyalties to the British throne. So it was political. The language policy, the cultural policy was political, so that they could create a sort of a class which would be deferential to the British. At the same time, Indians also wanted this because they saw their country as sliding down into corruption, into dogmatism, Brahminical superstition, and they wanted to move out into modernity. So different reasons that the different people had for claiming English language. And it is here that you see the man who drafted the official policy becomes important, and that is Macaulay. And it is here that I will stop speaking for the time being, and let me see what Shomidon has to offer in terms of his presentation on Macaulay. Shomidon tells me that he's made an extensive presentation, and I'm very happy that he's participating so enthusiastically in this entire procedure. Shomidon, it is now up to you. Would you like to present your PPT, and I'll go silent in the meanwhile so that you can make your presentation to your classmates.
Okay, thank you, Amrita. But actually, you have almost said 90% of my presentation. So I will discuss the 10% of it. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Clear? Hello.
We can hear you, Shomidon. Go ahead. You can see your screen as well.
I'm saying that can you see?
Yeah, I can hear you and I can see your screen as well.
Okay. And so I'm reading these initiation or in is a company, that company, their purpose only or
Shomidon, your audio is not clear. Shomidon, your audio is not clear. So I suggest, yes, Shomidon, your audio is not clear.
Yes, Amrita.
Your audio is not clear. Now try. Now try.
Okay, now is it clear?
Yeah, it's better. It's better.
Hello. Okay.
It's better. It's better.
In the companies was not
No, I can't hear you. I can't hear you, Shomidon. I'm sorry, but I can't hear you. Maybe it's a better idea that you show the slides first, right? And then you can speak briefly on the slides later on, right? Maybe because you are presenting, your data is not permitting you to sort of make a presentation. So show us the slides. So I can see the first slide where you talk about East Indian companies' need for educating Indians and bringing employees in, and decision to educate Indian people to use in companies' needed sectors. Okay, let's go on to the next slide.
Next, 1830. Now can you hear me?
No, I can't hear you, Shomiron. Go to the next slide. Just display the next slide, please. Shomiron, can you hear me?
You can hear clearly.
No, Shomiron, can the others hear Shomiron, or is it my problem?
No, sir, we can't also hear.
Shomiron, stop presenting now. Okay, because we can't hear you. This entire class will then go into a kind of a problem. And then try once again. Try and projecting. You disconnect from the meeting and try connecting once again, right? Once you connect, we will try one more time, right?
Okay.
Now you are audible. So my suggestion is you make a sort of audible presentation. Okay, don't project. Stop projecting and read from the slides that you have made, right? I'm sorry, but this is technology's problem. I appreciate all the work you have done, but maybe you just tell us what you wanted to say about Macaulay.
Will I try to present my screen for a second time?
No. You don't need to. We'll
Okay.
sort of lose the class. Then you can sort of send your presentation by mail to your classmates. Okay.
Okay.
Right.
So
Go ahead.
what I wanted to say that East India Company, when they first thought about our education system, it was because, as Amrita said earlier, that as they started to take control over our country, they had their tax offices, they had their BDO offices or financial offices, and in different sectors they needed employees. And because they are English people, so that's why they had to bring people from England to India for different sectors, and that cost them a lot. That's why they first thought that, okay, now let's teach those Indian peoples some of English, and then we will use them in our work, in our sectors. So that was the first reason why English education came in India. Okay, so then in the Charter Act of 1813, it was ordered that, or it was announced that 1 lakh rupees per year will be directed to East India Company for the betterment or development of Indian education system. And this responsibility was given to a committee. That committee was the General Committee of Public Instruction, which was established in 1823. Now, in that committee, there were two kinds of people who started a debate between themselves with mainly for 2 points. As Amrita said, the Anglicists, who were in the support of English literature and English model of education, English medium of education, and the Orientalists, who were in the support of Indian model, Indian education. Now, those 2 points for which they were debating was, first, that how will be the system of our education. Anglicists were claiming that it will be English model and English medium, Western culture. And Indians, Orientalists, they were claiming that no, it will be Indian language, Indian medium, like Sanskrit, Arabic, Farsi, etc., etc. So this debate, this controversy was going on, and the government was totally unable, totally unstable to take a right decision. So this was the main problem then. And then comes our hero, Thomas Babington Macaulay. He was a scholar, writer, and eloquent speaker, etc., etc. But mainly his identity was that he was chosen as the chairman of GCPI, General Committee of Public Instruction. As I said, it was established in 1823. And he talked in favor of Anglicists. He also said that no, Indian society, Indian culture is totally prejudiced and corrupted. Banglaয় যেটাকে বলবো কুসংস্কারাচ্ছন্ন আর দুর্নীতিগ্রস্ত. And as Amrita also said earlier, that he said a single shelf of European library is worth of the whole of Indian and Arabic literature. And also he said that literature, the term literature indicates only English literature, nothing else, not Sanskrit literature or Persian literature, etc., etc. None of those, only English literature, and learned natives of Indians, only those who are educated in English literature. That was, and he also said that that only those Indian scholars are those who has read Locke's philosophy and Milton's poetry. And he said that with this English medium, English process of education, we want to create a class of Indian person who will be Indian only in blood and color, but their thought will be English, their taste will be English, their opinions will be like English people, their moral and intellectual power will be like us, English people. That was Macaulay's view on the education system, which will be established in India. Now, this is also an important thing, that why they chose English as the medium of education. And it simply can be understood that the first reason is that they needed their servants, they needed their employees. Now, suppose I am an English person and I need an employee in my sector. Now, if I choose a Sanskrit learned person, then he won't be able or she won't be able to my commands. So that's why they thought, East India Company, that we will teach them English, only then they will be able to understand our orders. They will be able to work as we want them to work. So that was the main reason, the major reason. And some minor reason was that English was the key language for modern knowledge rather than Arabic, Parsic, or Sanskrit. And they thought that English will be capable of bringing about a renaissance in India. And of course, it brought a renaissance. And the most prominent language of the West was English. English was the main commercial language. It was the language for trading, and it was the language of ruling class, the government. It was the main language of the government. And another important point is that English was demanded by some Indians. This also Amrita has said earlier. So I figured out that there were two kind of Indians who wanted English to come in our society or in India. First kind of Indians, they wanted English for employment, for their jobs. As some of us, we are reading English literature for our future establishment. Just like that, they wanted for their employment, they wanted to get education in English literature, Western science, and Western philosophy. And there were another kind of persons like Raja Rammohun Roy, who wanted to let English come in India to change this prejudiced society of India. Because at the then time, there was Shotidaho Protha, Ballo Bibaho, and these kind of things, people used to believe in these kind of things blindly. So Raja Rammohun Rai and people like them, they thought that we need to bring a change. We need to bring a new system, an improved system, developed system, through which we will be able to educate these people. Okay. And of course, without English, it is not possible to make a native people a good scholar. So these are the main reasons why they chose English as the medium of education. Now, important segments of Macaulay's Minute, which was the main of my presentation. Now, I will send a link in the meeting, in the chat box, where you will find the whole Macaulay Minute, what Macaulay wrote in his minute to William Bentinck for the betterment of, in the support of Anglicist, for the betterment of Indian education system. Let me send it first.
I've already projected the minutes. Okay, I've already projected it.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Okay.
I'll send a copy of this to Sharonna, who can then circulate it to the class.
So Amrita, I also have sent the link in the chat box. So, okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. Okay. Thank you, Shomiran, for that excellent presentation.
It's not complete.
Oh, it's not complete. Okay.
Wait. Yeah, so important segments of Macaulay's Minute. Now, Macaulay talk in favor of English literature, and Macaulay did not supported the medium of education as in the mother tongue. Now, another important thing comes here, the downward filtration theory or trickle-down theory. Macaulay said that we will teach not the all of Indians. We will teach only 1% of Indian people, and they will teach the rest of it. So, because if we start to teach the all Indians, then it will cost us same as it was costing us to bring people from England to India. So we will not do that. We will teach only 1% of the whole Indian people, and they will teach the rest of it. But actually, this theory failed, and I will talk about that later. And all funds appropriate for the purpose would be best employed on English education alone. All government funds will be employed on English education, and government funds, if government feels that the Oriental education system is not being able to teach people, then the government funds will not be wasted on the printing of Oriental works. These were some important segments of Macaulay's Minute. And importance of Macaulay's Minute was that Macaulay's Minute brought the English education. Of course, it was a good side of it. And Macaulay, he resolved the great controversy between Anglicists and Orientalists. And Macaulay is the main reason for which we are reading or practicing English literature, English Western science, Western culture today. And Macaulay brought the Western education such as science and literature in the soil of India. Now there are some merits and demerits of Macaulay's Minute. Some of merits are that only for Macaulay's Minute there came a clear-cut policy of education, definite purpose of education. For Macaulay's Minute, the establishment of English schools happened in India, and education, they started educating in a low cost. So it saved a lot of money of them. But the demerits are a little bit important, because as I had to say at the very first of my presentation, that this education system was applied only on higher education system, not on primary, not on secondary, but on higher education system. But if you want to do any kind of reform, you have to go from the lower level to the upper level. So that was a big flaw of Macaulay's Minute. And as I said, the downward filtration theory was failed. The educated part, that 1% part, there is a good saying that those people, those Indians who learned English, who learned in the English system, they became more English than the English themselves. They started to talk in those vernacular languages, they started to talk in those Oriental languages in a wrong accent. Their food habit, their culture, their dress up senses, they all changed, and they became more English than those English people. Okay, so actually they were not able to educate the rest of Indians. So downward filtration theory actually failed, and closure of Sanskrit Pathshalas and Arabic madrasas, the opposition of Indian religion, and that mainly affected Muslims. Because you know, after 1758, when Palashi, the Battle of Palashi happened, British East Company, they defeated Muslims. That's why Muslims had kind of anger for English people. And now their Arabic language, their Persian language is also replaced by English. That's why Muslim people, they started to lost their jobs. And that is the main reason why Muslim took a very vital part in the revolt of 1857. যেটাকে ক্লাস 10 এ তোরা সবাই পড়েছিলি মহারানীর ঘোষণাপত্র বলে, ওই টাইমটা, ওই সময়টা মহাবিদ্রোহ। Okay, so these are some demerits, and at last, at the end of my presentation, I will say that I personally think that Macaulay's Minute is the only reason, as I said, why we are reading English or studying English today. But there are some controversy on it, that some regard him as the torchbearer, I mean Macaulay, as the torchbearer in the path of progress, but on the other hand, some blame him for his condemnation for the Oriental and vernacular languages of Indian people and lowering the Indian culture and tradition, and consider as the cause of all troubles. After Macaulay's Minute in 1837, English replaced Persian as the official language, as the court language. Persian was the court language till 1837, but then English became. But I think personally that, of course, Macaulay's Minute, it had to happen. Our society was totally, it is still very prejudiced and corrupted. So we needed that help of Western developed culture to bring our Renaissance in India. Thank you. That was my presentation. Amrita?
You've exceeded all my expectations. It was a really good presentation. I apologize that I could not give you the time probably to show you your slides, but then that's the problem of the network. But coming from a first-year student, this was incredibly well done. Shomiron, you've covered almost all the points that I wanted to say on Macaulay, and you've done a fabulous job out of it. And as you have pointed out, in a sense, when we are all studying here English literature, in a certain sense, all of us are, children of Macaulay, as it were, although the ways in which we have used the English language, as we were discussing in the earlier class, could be very different. And the ways in which we subverted Macaulay's cause to create a gentleman or a class of people who will be deferential to the British and created instead a discourse of nationalism is something that is we can discuss later on. But thank you for having done a fabulous, fabulous job. Once the department reopens, you deserve a small treat from me, right? Okay, remind me. Right. Okay. Now, if you go silent, then I'll just once again just wrap up what Shomiron suggested. This is February the 2nd, 1835, as he pointed out. Now, the entire question is what is to be done, as Shomiron pointed out, with the 1 lakh rupees. What kind of education would have to be done? Now, the first point that he obviously says is that, that Indian literature, or whatever is Arabic and Asian literature rather, is without any value. And he says, and this is the line that I'm sort of marking, I've never found one among them who could deny that a single shelf on a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and America and Arabia. The intrinsic superiority of the Western literature is indeed fully admitted by those members of the committee who support the Oriental plan of action. So both the Orientalists and the Anglicists, they considered themselves vastly superior. And the Anglicists suggested that the literature of the Orient should not be taken into consideration at all. It was worthless, valueless, immoral, and therefore only English literature could supplant or replace them, right? Therefore, English education was imperative. Now comes this question which, Shomiron, I am very grateful that you use the filtration theory. The filtration theory suggests that, you create a kind of a medial class. I'll be coming to that in a moment. But the point that you did not probably mention and should have, it's no fault of yours, but this is what is called the white man's burden. So that these people are uneducated, they lack education, they lack knowledge. Therefore, it is up to us, Englishmen, white men, it is the burden of the Englishmen to teach them what is proper. So this is the white man's burden. If you follow from this line, we have to educate a people who cannot at present be educated by means of their mother tongue. We must teach them some foreign language, right? And therefore, what is he going to change? Metaphysics, morals, government, jurisprudence, trade. As Shomiron pointed out, trade was, after all, one of the most important reasons. And he says that English is the language spoken by the ruling class, spoken by the higher class of natives at the seats of government. It's going to be the language of commerce throughout the seas of the East, right? And therefore, the English tongue is that which would be most useful to our native subjects, right? And then comes another very important statement that Macaulay is making. Shomiron, note this, that he's suggesting that there are no books of the English language. Therefore, we need also text books through which the Indians can be taught English. And therefore, the importance of the primers of the English language become very important, as it were. There's another very important statement that he's making. He's saying that once upon a time, what we were to classical Greece, we imitated them and we became civilized. Similarly, the Indians, if we teach them our civilization, will become civilized. This is what Mark Twain once called in Huck Finn the civilizing motion of the British, the white man's burden once again. And then comes this question of, as he points out, the filtration theory. I will just briefly sort of bring that segment up for you to just give you an idea. Is summing up here. This is the most important part, the last 1.5 pages of the minutes. He suggests that within our limited means to attempt to educate the body of people, and therefore what is the necessity? That's the filtration theory. To form, if you look at this section, to form a class of who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern, a class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in tastes, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. To that class, we may leave it to refine the vernacular dialects of the country, to enrich those dialects with terms of science borrowed from Western nomenclature, and to render them by degrees fit vehicles for conveying knowledge to the great mass of the population. So we teach one class English, and then these people can translate these ideas into the vernacular languages and then disseminate them among the masses so that they become also enlightened. This is the model that Macaulay is trying to create. Also, he's not saying that these are the people who are going to be our clerks, right? And then he suggests, and this is very important, that the funds be disposed to give later larger encouragement to the Hindu college at Calcutta and to establish schools in which the English language may be well and thoroughly taught. Now, Shomidon is very right. This is the point where Macaulay is laying a map. He is suggesting a clear-cut government policy, which the British government followed. And this is when English education starts to take off. Earlier, there were schools established by individuals like Duff. Now you have English schools which are established by the government in almost every nook and corner of India and Bengal especially, where English education in English becomes important. So the Sanskrit toll and pathshala now coexists with the English school, and obviously because of employment opportunities, as Shomidon was also pointing out, people gravitated towards these towards these government schools. And very importantly, we'll find that it became the bedrock. You see, people like Acharya Prafulla Chandra Ray or Jagadish Bose went to these schools and then later on went to Hindu College, and Presidency College Hindu College became the fulcrum from which, the Indian Renaissance would take off. And he says, we are a board for wasting for public money, and he says printing books, so we do not need to waste our money. Rather, let us, publish books in English. Let us create a policy whereby English replaces Persian and Arabic, as the official language. So this is the point from which English takes off in India. And all the literature that you will find, apart from people like Derozio or the people who went across to England to learn English, Michael Madhusudhan Datta, for example, they were already exposed. But from 1836 onwards, 1838 onwards rather, English teaching, English education becomes part and parcel of the official policy. So much so, it became so much so dispersed that when the language policy of independent India in 1947 is considered, English is considered now to be an Indian language also. So 1838, if we take 100 years then, slightly more than 100 years, English has percolated into India to an extent that it has been recognized that as one of the many official languages of India. Right. Now, as Shomidon pointed out, Macaulay was horribly patronizing. You cannot, Macaulay was dismissing all the literature that India and the Asians had. At the same time, Macaulay was very methodical. in creating a minute that would establish a government policy. So in a sense, then what did the Indians do to Macaulay? They accepted Macaulay's, and Macaulay's, of course, quoting Raja Rammohun Roy's letter also. They took the ideas and then, as we discussed in Bhabha, created a third space through which English education could be used to challenge the very colonial machinery. Now, I will just very briefly come to the last figure. I'm going to send all this material to you, Macaulay's minutes, Raja Rammohun Roy's letter, and an entire course on Indian, the rise of English in India. This is Trevelyan on the education of people of India, and this is 1938. And what does Trevelyan have to add? He adds, and Trevelyan is in agreement with Macaulay that, that Indian literature is not really worth it, and that even if they had merit, India has now, sunk into an abyss of dogmatism, received knowledge, and superstition. And Trevelyan also brings in Christianity, and he says that, we need English so that we can teach them Christian morality, right? That Indians, by and large, are deprived in terms of morality. And he therefore suggested that, Indian literature is just an ocean of words with no influx of ideas, right? And therefore, the Indians, if they are educated in English, become more English than Hindus, and they will be cut off from indigenous knowledge, and they will be loyal servants of the British. And therefore, he pointed out that, once again, it will create tremendous amount of opportunities for employment, and it will later on be used for this policy of creating this class, as Macaulay said, this class which would act as interpreters between the broader segment of the people and the English rulers, as it were. And therefore, this is where Trevelyan's words, a common standard of taste, a common nomenclature, and that another important thing that Trevelyan is suggesting, although, we can't say that Trevelyan anticipated this, that it would be a kind of a bonding language, a kind of a language that would bond together this vast, amorphous subcontinent together and these different people together. So between the three of them then, Grant, Macaulay, and Trevelyan were articulating the British position. Of course, there was also the Christian missionary position. And Raja Rammohun Roy was partially articulating the Indian position as to why we needed English and what we needed. He's not saying that we need everything. We need the scientific education, and therefore we need the language. Now, please remember that Raja Rammohun Roy was tremendously heckled by the Brahmins and the general population of India. He was discarded by his own mother. He had to fight a legal battle against her. And of course, you know that Limerick where, Badi Khana Kul and so on and so forth. Very few people of you have actually visited or will visit Raja Rammohun Roy's, ancestral house and the Shoti Ghat from where, India's modernity took off. But remember, if there's one place of pilgrimage for a lot of us, then that is the place from where India's journey towards modernity stands. Of course, one might say that, Raja Rammohun Roy, as Gandhi pointed out, that Raja Rammohun Roy was surrendering to the British, that he was perpetuating British rule, he was accepting the superiority of the British. On the other hand, as Rabindranath pointed out, we needed the English language to challenge, to acquire modernity and thereby challenge British hegemony. However, let us make it clear that Macaulay's minutes did start English education in India. One, that it helped the English in creating classes of people who would govern India for them. And therefore, it was a part of a greater imperial ploy. At the same time, somewhere later in the century, English education and political ideas became a vehicle through which British imperialism was challenged, and subsequently, we got independence. But remember something, that once 1835 happened, once colonialism happened, our identity changed. Once English education came into being, one society passed away and another society entered, a society in which English would play an important part. And it is from this post-colonial society. Now, post-colonial in the sense after colonial for me, right? This, post-colonial can also mean resistance, but in this particular case, I say post-colonial, after colonialism, that there was the space for a new literature that would use English as its means of expression. Now, what the problems of this expression were is something which I shall look forward to in my next class and next presentation, where we will discuss what it meant, what happens when you express yourself in English, what happens when one writes in English. And the best person who articulated this problem was Raja Rao. And that is why in our next class we have your classmate who is going to present her views on Raja Rao. And as Shomiran pointed out, just don't present on Raja Rao, you also articulate what you feel about the problems of Indian writing in English. So we'll take that up in the next class. Meanwhile, once again, thank you, Shomiran, for doing a fabulous job. You've exceeded, as I said, all my expectations. You've looked at all the major points, and I'm very, very happy that you have shown such an enthusiasm, such reading at such short notice. I congratulate you, and I look forward that you carry this enthusiasm on into the other classes as well. Right, it is with that then that I am bringing this recording to an end, and then we can take a few questions from you.